Good morning. My name is Ben Miller. I run the higher education program here at the Center for American Progress. I want to thank you all for joining us this morning. I know the first week in DC after Labor Day is always a very busy one, so appreciate you spending your mornings here with us today. Before I get started, just a couple quick items. The hashtag for today's event is part-time students, so feel free to use that. If you're a student who's ever attended part-time, we'd particularly love to hear your story. Second, I want to extend a thank you to our panelists, especially our students who are taking time out of their schedules to join us today. And finally, I want to say thank you to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which helps support this work here at CAP. We're here today to discuss a very important issue in higher education, how to better serve part-time students. From our perspective, this is an issue that too often gets underlooked in national policy discussions. So about 40% of undergraduate students attend college part-time. And unfortunately, according to federal data, we know that a lot of them are unlikely to make it to graduation. Of students who started college exclusively part-time, about 40% of them drop out before even making it to their second year. Of students who attend somewhat part-time, about half of them ultimately earn a credential versus about 80% of exclusively full-time students. And when you think about this in the context of sort of our big national goals for college attainment, we're never going to get to the level of college attainment we need in this country if we can't find ways to better serve this very substantial population in higher education. So this is an issue that Marcella Bombardieri, a senior policy analyst here at CAP, took a closer look at in a report released earlier this week called Hidden in Plain Sight. It breaks down what the federal data tell us about students who go part-time, as well as lays out some areas for additional research. To further unpack this question more, I'm really excited that we've got three great things here for you this morning. So first, we've got a short 90-second video that talks a little bit more about part-time students and what we know. Then Marcella is going to moderate a panel with two students who have attended part-time and hear from them and their experiences. And then we've got a great panel of practitioners who can talk about this issue from both the institutional and national perspective. So with that, thank you again for coming, and let's get to the video.
When you think of an American college student, what comes to mind? Fresh-faced 18-year-olds living in dorms and walking to class? Frisbee on the quad, Greek life, and 4 years of pizza-fueled study sessions? It turns out, today's college students are not whom you may think. In fact, nearly 4 in 10 of them are enrolled part-time. Part-time students are often older than their full-time peers, and they're more likely to be raising a family and supporting themselves financially. Take Missy, a 37-year-old part-time nursing student from Baltimore. Missy is the mother of 2 young children. Her husband works long hours, and they can't afford to pay for childcare, so she has to plan her class schedule around when the kids' grandparents can babysit. This means she can only take a couple of classes each semester. Missy expects it to take 8 years to complete her bachelor's in nursing. She is not alone. A shocking proportion of today's college students will never graduate. Only about a quarter of exclusively part-time students earn a degree. Among those who attend a mix of part-time and full-time, just over half graduate. That's bad news for them and bad news for our economy. You see, to ensure that we have the talent for the jobs of tomorrow, the U.S. needs to increase the number of Americans holding a college degree by 16 million in the next decade. We haven't paid enough attention to the needs of part-time students. That has to change. We need to provide solutions for students to study part-time and still earn a timely degree. Join the discussion so that we can make college work for all.
Everyone, I'm Marcella Bombardieri, and I'm really delighted to have you all here for a wonderful conversation we're going to have with a couple of really eloquent students and a panel of great practitioners. So I will get started by inviting Missy and Savannah up to the stage. Good morning, Savannah and Missy. So I will introduce you guys. Missy is the Missy from the video, immortalized with her animated avatar. So thank you for being game for that. So Missy Antonio is a part-time student at the Community College of Baltimore County and is working towards a bachelor's degree in nursing through a accelerated associates to bachelor's program. She's also a senior mentor in the first year experience program at CCBC. And Savannah Ward is a student at Trinity Washington University, currently going full-time. And Savannah previously attended 2 community colleges in Missouri, a mix of part-time and full-time. She's a human relations major and also a singer and composer, and who's interested in a music career, among other things. So I'm going to start with you, Missy. So we learned a little bit about you from the video, but one thing that comes out in our new report is that about 2/3 of part-time students are over the age of 24, and about 40% of them have dependents. And you sort of fit that profile. You're a typical part-time student in a lot of ways. And I wanted to ask you to tell us about how you ended up going to college when you did, and how you ended up as a part-time college student.
So years ago, when I was growing up, people in my family did not go to college. Neither of my parents went to college. My brother did not. Sister did not initially. So when I graduated high school, I just figured that I was to go to work because that's what we did in my family. We went to work. So I had multiple jobs. Starting out, some reception work, insurance adjusting. I ended up doing accounting work for a company in downtown Baltimore for about 8 years. Everything was going great. I was married at the time, had a 5-year-old daughter. They came to me one day and asked me to come to the conference room, gave me a package and said that I was the youngest person there, had been there the least, and I made the most money, and that they had to do more with less. So they sent me on my way with my severance package, and I didn't really know what to do or say. So I went home to my husband, and we talked about it, and I told him that I really wanted a career that somebody couldn't tell me they didn't need me anymore. So he's like, well, what are you going to do now? So I ended up actually going right over to CCBC, had never been to college, didn't know what I was doing, took my placement test, immediately started at 14 credits a semester. My daughter was in kindergarten, so everything was good. I went through 3 semesters, starting at the very bottom, had to take multiple classes that were non-credit because I hadn't been to school in 17 years. And then in the meantime, I ended up expecting a baby in the middle of the semester, totally unplanned. So that kind of put a damper on my full-time status at the time. So I had to scale back to part-time once the baby came. So now I've been part-time. I have 1 more class left before I can apply to the nursing program at CCBC. I actually can apply. I'm just waiting for my childcare situation to work out so that I know that I can go, full-time into nursing without having to worry about my children during the day. So that's ultimately what happened.
Savannah, I believe you're 24, and so there's quite a few traditional college-age students who are going to school part-time, and I wondered if you could just tell us a little bit about your educational journey. How did you get where you are now, and how did you end up going part-time for part of that?
So when I initially started or graduated from high school, everyone in my family did go to school or has a master's degree of some sort. So, and I'm the baby. And so for me, there was a lot of pressure to essentially, this is what I'm supposed to do. But I didn't really know quite what I wanted to do. And so I went to the community college in my hometown, where roughly actually like half of my graduating class ended up going to. And just routinely taking, I think, a full-time set of classes, and most of my friends were still staying there as well, and actually had an apartment, but wasn't really committed to going to school. So did not do that great the first semester. Tried to bounce back the second and third semester by going part-time, but still wasn't really committed to it, and so ended up actually having to take a break for a full semester. In that time, I was living with my mother, and she is a United Methodist pastor and got moved to a church in St. Louis, Missouri. I'm initially from Kansas City, Missouri, or right outside of it. And so basically it was like, well, I'm not really doing anything with my life, and I'm not sure what I want to do, so I'm going to go with my mom. Free rent, free food, so good call. But in that time was actually really struggling with my depression and anxiety around like seeing my friends getting close to finishing university or college. The pressure of my family being like, what do you want to do? Like, you need to pick a degree, pick a field, and like stick to it. And just a lot of like mental strain on myself. But in that time when I got to St. Louis, I actually enrolled at Merrimack Community College, which is in Kirkwood, which is like 20 minutes outside of St. Louis, the city, and ended up just like kind of going full force because at that time I was like, school is becoming important to me, and this degree is becoming important to me. It's no longer just like what my family wants. And so started out part-time and just kind of took like a couple of psychology classes and music classes. Those are my two biggest interests. And in that time was like involved in a lot of stuff on my campus and got involved with just like a lot. But ended up staying at Merrimack for, I guess, 3 semesters as well, going part-time though. And then in the spring of 2015, decided it was time to transfer to a 4-year, but didn't really know where I wanted to go, but knew I wanted to be near family. And my eldest sister lives here in DC, and I used to spend several summers here in DC, and so Trinity, Washington, and Bowie State were at the top of my list, and Trinity gave me more money, so that's where I ended up going, and basically I am a second semester sophomore at Trinity, and hopefully going to be finished in 2 years, so yeah.
And how did you decide to go back to full-time when you came to Trinity?
My family has been really good about like just being like, we're going to help you in any way that we can. They've all taken out a lot of like loans and stuff and a lot of money and sacrifices to help me be as fully dedicated to school as I can be. I do work part-time still, but I don't have to work any more than like 20 hours, and really it's just like fast cash for me being able to have a social life and stay committed to school. So that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Well, that's a good segue too. I wanted to ask you both about the financial constraints. How has finances been a factor in your decisions about your enrollment or those of other classmates that you see? And I know I'll start with you, Missy, that you mentioned the child care dimension is sort of part of the financial picture for you.
Yeah, so actually at CCBC, your child has to be 2 years old and potty trained. Well, I don't know any 2-year-olds that are potty trained. So my son will be 2 in November, but even so, childcare full-time there is like $165 a week for student rate. So it's kind of expensive when you don't have a job. So right now, my mom and my dad are helping when they can. My mom actually works full-time. She just retired yesterday. So I'm hoping that she wants to retire and babysit. And then my in-laws do help. But it's not, it's hard. And then, I have to pay for college myself. I did actually get involved at CCBC, so I work in the student life office. So I mentor new students that are coming in. So each semester I have about 250 new students that I correspond with on a daily basis. They pay me a stipend. It's basically tuition reimbursement. But my mom has been helping with my tuition. So at the end of the semester, it has been a check. For like around $1,500, and I'll usually take the check and put it towards the next semester, or you can take it as cash, either way. So that does help. And my husband works like probably 70 hours a week, so that I don't have to. So we cross paths at night, but not very often. So it's definitely difficult.
And Savannah, have finances been a factor for your decisions or for those of other students you know?
For sure. So when I first started school, I started out with a scholarship and then of course didn't do well, so they take away scholarships. But then the second semester and so on in community college ended up meeting either my sister or my mom halfway on tuition and like book fees, which meant I had to work part-time to do that. And then like I said, when I got to Trinity, my grades were pretty good. So most of the tuition is covered throughout scholarship and private and federal loans. So, yeah.
So, Missy, we learned from the video that you expected to take about 8 years to get a bachelor's degree in nursing. So, can you describe a little bit about sort of, what that path has entailed? Like, how many classes are you taking a semester? And, you mentioned developmental classes, or which are also known as remedial classes, and that those, have factored into sort of the length of your path.
So I had to start at the very bottom of math. It was like Math 081, like a general basic math. So that's a non-credit course, but I had to take Math 81, 82, 83. Those are all non-credit. So you're talking about a year and a half, 3 semesters of non-credit classes, at least for math. So I took my first 3 semesters, I probably took 14 semesters, 14 credits a semester. And then I had to scale back to part-time once I had the baby. But I feel like I've been taking general classes for years. So like I just recently got into the harder stuff, the harder sciences, the A&P, which is obviously harder and takes more time studying and harder to pass. But I feel like majority of my path has been basic general classes. So even so, once I'm done my A&P course and I apply to the nursing program, it's still going to be another 2 years just to get my associate's degree. But I have talked about transferring out to like University of Maryland or somewhere else that offers a bachelor's of science of nursing, which is 4 semesters, but that's full-time. So right now I'm part-time, so I would have to go back to full-time to finish in 2 years.
So, and since you went to part-time and since you had your second child, you're taking usually 2 classes a semester?
2 classes, yeah.
You have to look for like evening classes that both meet the requirements and go in the right order and also fit the schedule of when you can get babysitting
Yes, so
help.
evening or online. I've taken a lot of online classes since the baby, but I still have to go to college to take all the tests and the final, and so I still do have to go there. But all of my classes have been in the evening for the past 2 years, or on a whole day on Saturday, like 8 to 4.
And have you found that sometimes because of your schedule and your childcare availability that you're not able to take the classes that you want, like when you're ready
Yes.
to take them?
Yeah, there's been multiple professors that I have researched and other students have taken that have been really great, and I haven't been able to take 2 professors that I can think of because his classes are only during the day.
So Savannah, can you tell us about your path and when did you start college and when do you expect to finish and how much sort of time off have you had in between?
I graduated high school in 2011 and started fall 2011, and then went from 2011 to 2013, and then took a break for roughly 8 months, and then went back that fall. I have roughly 2 years left if I don't change my major again, and basically, I also have a visual impairment, which can affect how well I do in a class as well too. So some of the classes that I haven't done well in has been for multiple disabilities, like pushing back at me and me having to push back harder at getting the work done, essentially. So currently, yes, I only have 2 years left, but that could also change and vary. So.
Yeah, so you mentioned your visual impairment, and you also earlier mentioned that you dealt with some anxiety and depression, and these have been factors in your college career. So are these things that influence sort of what was the right level of enrollment for you?
Yes, initially I was like, I'm a go-getter. I'm gonna take 12 to 15 hours and I'll be fine. My body told me differently and my mind told me differently. With my vision, it's mostly a lot of they use a lot of technology in classes now. Before, like when I was in high school and like growing up, it was mostly like books and like smart boards, so it wasn't as much of a strain. But in most of my classes, I use or they use some sort of like computer or like whatever, and that is straining on my eyes. So typically, right now I'm full-time, but I've set it up so that my classes, varying on what they need like in the class, do not overstrain. So like if 2 of my classes need me to have a laptop or like vice versa, or need me to be like constantly looking at a screen to focus, I have like another class that is more like lecture. so that I can write, because where my vision does not come in, my hearing does. And so I can type and write, like handwrite, really, really, really fast. And that's mostly how I learn and keep up with most of my schoolwork. And so studying outside of school becomes one thing. A couple of my textbooks are audio textbooks, just so that I don't have to read as much as well. And I tend to try to take classes with friends so that I can use their notes or like have a note taker as well. So, yeah.
So you both know very well that there are disadvantages to going to school part-time. It takes a really long time, and there's more time for sort of things to go wrong in your life. I think both of you have sort of put down a lot of roots on your campus, but a lot of part-time students find they're not on campus as much. They don't have those supports as much for to help them when things get rocky. So a lot of people say, well, the right thing to do is to go full-time. But I know, Savannah, you told me that you were really glad you had the opportunity to go part-time and that was helpful to you. So can you talk about more about why that is?
Yeah. So going part-time, I think, is, especially if you don't know what you want to do, like for like your career or whatever, it gives you an opportunity to take several different classes, or just to like be immersed in sort of a college atmosphere, and to like get your feet wet and set yourself up to be ready to go full-time so that you can be more like successful. I have several friends that I mentioned earlier that I went to school with straight out of high school who either have dropped out or are steadily still going part-time simply based off the fact that they don't feel prepared or connected or like they have the resources to do what they want to do. And luckily for me, once I got to the community college in St. Louis, that there were definitely more resources and more advantages like out there and presented to me than when I initially went to the community college from where I'm from. And I really like advocate for people going part-time. I have several friends who are either 24, 25 who are like now trying to figure out if they're going to go back to school simply because they've been working and they're like, this isn't taking me anywhere. And everything is pushing back to them with like needing a bachelor's degree. And I try to tell them that like going part-time isn't a bad thing, and it's actually financially can be helpful and just like resourceful. So.
And Missy, if could magically make childcare free for all kids of community college students, would you have wanted to keep going full-time after your son was born?
I think I may have wanted to, only because I feel like it's taking forever. I feel like if I could go full-time, yes, it would be more work and a lot less sleep, but I would be done a lot faster.
Well, before we go to some questions from the audience, I wanted to, point out, as Ben mentioned, that 40% of students who start off part-time in their first year never make it to sophomore year. You both have made it a lot further than that, and I think you found the kinds of supports that have been really helpful to you. So I wonder if each of you could talk a little bit about like what has helped you be successful.
You want to go first?
I would say definitely as an older student, adult learner, I feel like that there's not a lot of things for like the evening classes, like the later classes to get involved in at school because everything is pretty much closed. But I'm always in class like, hey guys, come to the Get Involved Fair and come to this because I work in the Student Life office. So I'm always telling everyone in class about all of the events. And I feel like people really do come, like when I tell them, but I just don't think they know a lot. So I don't know, they're like, are you planted in here to get us to go? I'm like, maybe. Oh,
lost your mic.
But so I feel like that definitely getting involved really helps. And then also like seeing other people at school succeed, like people that I've met there that have graduated and now have their nursing degree. Like if in my same situation, older adult learner, I think seeing the successful ones that can keep going, I think that really helps too.
To piggyback off of that, going to school in St. Louis, really, when I got there, I made it a point to get involved with like peer mentor groups. And in a lot of those groups, actually, two of my good friends from back there were actually several years older than me. And so just like their determination to be like, I'm focused on this was really helpful and like helped me to stay focused. And then when I got to Trinity, I had to sort of form that group myself because then I was in an atmosphere of a 4-year with younger students and being the older student, and I'm sort of a leader in a lot of ways. And so, but also like had several friends who are like 21 to 24 as well. And so they're also in a mindset of like wanting to get done sooner just because you've been in school for X amount of years and you're ready to go. But also just like having the community of like family and a network outside of school or people who have gone to school here in DC that I'm now friends with who are done and cheering me on has also been super helpful.
So last question I'll ask you, if you could wave a magic wand, is there something that you would like to see your school or policymakers do to help part-time students do better?
I think I mentioned when I talked to you the first time that something that would have been more helpful at both the community college levels, and I know that they are trying to get better about this, but doing orientation for a longer period of time than just like an hour or two, which is hard to do because there are so many part-time and like people commuting to school. But I really do think that part of the reason I've done well at Trinity is because I was there for an entire week ahead of like the classes, just in general, having to be there, and them sort of like getting me amped up by several like speakers and just like being like there is a student life here outside of the classes you start taking the following week. And I think that if more community colleges could like sort of figure out how to do a similar thing with that for all of their new students, it would be more helpful, because then people would find out where like resources are, whether it's for like disabilities or like their mental health or like whatever classes they're taking, but also like the clubs that really do take place on several community colleges campuses. Like there's a lot and people just don't know about it, and so a lot of people end up going from their home to school and then to work, and then like that's it, and that's just their routine, which I think is a big part of why a lot of part-time students who may not have children but just like are there, whether it's because of their parents or they think they're just supposed to be there, don't finish or stop going. So
I would probably say more financial aid and also childcare. I think that people will be more successful. I mean, the first week at school, I saw multiple people bring their kids to school because school started late, so they had their children in class with them because their children didn't go to school till the next week. So, I mean, they were still at class, but they had to bring their kids.
Great. I think we have time for one question from the audience. Yes.
Hi, Luann McNabb with the National Council of Teachers of English. Were you offered any kind of placement exam so you could bypass some of those general ed classes to help you move along quicker?
I did take the placement exam. I tested out of reading and English. I didn't need any remedial courses for that, but the math, they did let you retake the test once. I think you can take it 2 times. But I opted to take the class because I hadn't been to school in 17 years, and I felt like I really needed the class for the refresher to get through the harder math.
Great. Thank you so much, Savannah and Missy. We're really honored to have you here today. Thanks a lot. So we're going to have a little bit of a stage change here, and I'll plug our report as well, because one cool thing that we have is we have more student voices in the report. The Community College of Baltimore County was really helpful in allowing me to spend some time there and meet a bunch of great students. So we have about half a dozen student stories in the report, and different types of part-time students. And I think this was a really helpful conversation to see some of the different types of issues that younger part-time students, older part-time students deal with. So, thank you both, and I think we can invite our other panelists to come up and join me on the stage. Thank you all for being here. I'm just going to very quickly introduce each of you. So we have Juan Salgado, who is the Chancellor of the City Colleges of Chicago, and previously spent many years as the head of the Instituto del Progreso Latino, a community organization that offers some really life-changing education programs for both youth and adults in a low-income and largely immigrant community in Chicago. And we have Johari Barnes, who is the Director of Academic Support at the Community College of Baltimore County, the same institution that Missy attends. And Johari works on developmental education and oversees the Student Success Centers, which offer tutoring and coaching and other supports on each campus. And she also teaches a one-credit orientation class that's required for new students called Transitioning to College, which sort of relates to some of Savannah's points about orientation. Johari herself spent time as a part-time student in college while working and raising a child. And we have Dr. Karen Stout, who is president and CEO of Achieving the Dream, which is a network of over 200 community colleges and other partners that are committed to evidence-based institutional improvement. And she previously spent 14 years as president of Montgomery County Community College in Pennsylvania. And we have Dr. Neil Hawley, who is Assistant Director of the Post-Secondary and Workforce Development Institute at Education Commission of the States, which is a nonpartisan education policy organization that provides research and assistance to the people behind the policy in 50 states. Neil came to ECS from West Virginia, where he was Vice Chancellor for Policy and Planning for the State Higher Education Policy Commission. So I would like to start by asking each of you to tell me about, who are the part-time students that you serve in one way or another through your work, and what should our audience and policymakers and advocates know about those part-time students? Do you want to start, Juan?
Sure. I suppose in this conversation I'd like to talk about both experiences as someone who led a not-for-profit that worked with almost exclusively, in the case of adults, part-time students, many students like Missy that were interested in going into nursing and health careers. And by and large, they were moms, they were folks that would be coming from jobs. Literally, you'd go to the restroom and you'd see them throwing water on their face because they were very, very tired, right? Or they were coming to meet their kids, because we would pick up the kids at the schools so that they didn't have to do that part of it, so they could come from work to meet their children while they can get their education. And so extremely motivated, understand that there's an end game here, making an extreme sacrifice for that time period. I remember seeing a student walking out of her husband had driven her, there were 3 other kids, and she's walking out, and she's saying goodbye to her children, right? She does this every night. She's going to do this every night for about 4 or 5 or 6 years, right? And she would like walk to the car and walk away and walk to the car, because this is her children's time that she could be spending with her children. And so, when you think about what the part-time students are doing from a human standpoint for the betterment of their families, you understand, the intrinsic motivation, and yet the multiplicity of barriers that actually exist. And now that I'm leading a community college system as a whole, there's just a greater diversity of those part-time students than I had before. They come from all across our city. Some are not needing any developmental education whatsoever, right? They're part-time for different kinds of reasons. Others are actually need quite a bit of developmental education, and how well we do that work is really seminal to how quickly we move. When I heard Missy talk about the journey in Dev Ed, it's painful, right? It's painful, and that's something that we absolutely need to get better at our institutions of higher education.
There's no typical part-time student. And I think that our colleges need to be better at understanding the part-time student experience, gathering data about their part-time students, understanding their motivations. A part-time student we classify as anybody who takes between 1 and 11 credits. Well, when you disaggregate data around the number of credits students are taking and you begin to look at their pathways, they're different. And intentionally designing our colleges and our support systems around the demographics, the disaggregated demographics of our part-time students is really important. And we're not intentional about part-time student design. We're more intentional, I think, about full-time student design. When Missy said she's by herself at night, she can't find the faculty member she wants to take because those faculty members are teaching during the day. Those are examples of the way we structure our entire processes to support full-time students. And indeed, part-time students become hidden. I want to say to Missy, though, that my dad went to college part-time at night and earned his bachelor's degree and was able to support a family and go through that. And one of the keys to his ability, I think, is the same that we heard from the two students, a very strong support system, but also the GI Bill that gave a consistent stream of financial support at just the right time to keep him enrolled. And so when you start to talk, well, I know we'll begin talking about some of the policy issues, but certainly that type of financial support's also important.
Definitely. At the Community College of Baltimore County, we have 63,000 students. Large number of those students are part-time. And when you have students who don't have transportation, and it takes you 3 buses to get to your campus, or you have childcare issues, financial aid doesn't really cover you enough to make the cost for your classes, your books, all of those things make going to college that much more difficult. And I agree. We offer lots of classes, a lot of options during the day, but when 60% of classes are taught by part-time faculty, are our part-time students really always getting the level of commitment from a faculty member? There's nothing wrong with adjuncts. I think we've all, have been one or have been friends with one. But the reality of it is most adjuncts are just going from one campus, one college to another college. And sometimes they're not in a position to give students resources or direct them to the resources that they need. And the resources may not be open after 5 o'clock when the part-time students are there.
And our adjuncts are also hidden in plain sight as well. Yes. We don't necessarily do a good job as colleges in creating opportunities for our adjunct faculty to have a sense of belonging on the college campus, to give them access to the resources that are so important to help students, to do simple things like include an array of resources on a syllabus, and to start off talking about those and directing students. So we need to do a better job for adjunct faculty as well.
And I would just add from my experience working in West Virginia, and thanks again for inviting ECS to be a part of this. This is a great event that's highlighting a very important issue, is that we had institutions that served a large rural population, and the needs of those part-time students are very different from those in metro areas where there's no public transportation, there's not a lot of child care options, and particularly there's not a lot of options for employment either. And so those students bring a different set of challenges. At ECS, we're particularly focused on adult students and aid programs, state aid programs that are targeted at those students. And unfortunately, there aren't a lot of state level options for adults who want to return to a 2 or 4 year institution. And that's one of the lines of research that we'll get more into policy in a little bit, but we'll dive into that then.
Johari, I'd like to ask you a little bit more about, you're pretty close to the front line, and when you're, you teach students, you work with students, you supervise people who work directly with students. You've been a part-time student, so what are you and your staff doing on a part-time basis to help part-time students? I mean, on a day, excuse me. What are you doing on a full-time and sort of day-to-day basis to help your part-time students succeed?
Well, we definitely try to make a lot of data-driven decisions. looking at the data to find out, when those students are actually on campus and trying to reach out to them and to their faculty members as well to do more professional development with those part-time faculty. We offer lots of different academic workshops that students can come to. We have been piloting, it's not that embedded tutoring is new, but we are trying to do more of that because we have found the students don't come to the Student Success Center because they just don't want to. They just don't have the time. If you are trying to run and go get your kids from daycare, or you have a transportation issue and you have to make that bus, you don't have time to take your classes and then go to the Student Success Center for help. So having embedded tutors or having an embedded coach in that class helps the student get the additional assistance that they need. So we're definitely talking to students, we're talking to faculty, we're doing a lot more of engaging these folks so we can do the best that we can for students. We don't always know the answers, so we need to talk to students to find out what they think they need for us to provide. I think that conversation needs to happen more. Administrators do a lot of thinking at conference room tables, but it's the students that we need to be talking to.
Yeah, so just to get down to the nitty-gritty, I don't know that everyone would know exactly what embedded tutoring looks like, and I think that's an interesting model. Can you just say a little bit more about how that works?
So what happens is, and we kind of let the faculty member and the tutor or the coach work the dynamic out, but really what it is that you have a support person in the classroom with the faculty member. The faculty member still teaches the class, they still regulate how the class goes, but when you have students that may be lacking in a certain place, so I'll give an example of a calculus class. Calculus has a lot of algebra embedded in it. But if you have a student who has gotten to the calculus class, whether they've taken a placement test or they have taken the previous class, but they're struggling with algebra, the faculty member can't take the time to go over that algebra with the student because they have this course outline that says you need to do all of these things at a certain time. So having the tutor in the class or having the coach in the class allows those students who need a little bit of help to get that. So the teacher can continue on with the larger part of the class, and then when that student gets the skills they need, they can come right on and catch up with everyone else. So that we found that to be very helpful.
Juan, so I wanted to ask you a little bit more. You told us, a little bit about your work wearing your last hat, and I also want to mention that you, for your work at the Instituto, you won a MacArthur Fellowship, commonly known as a Genius Grant. So you're doing really amazing work with, a lot of students who, have a grade school education, and you're getting them ready for college or ready for the workforce, and cramming, multiple years of schooling, into 1 year. And these are students who are working a full day, they have families. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that is even possible and sort of how that might apply to the college setting?
Yeah, absolutely. So we were able to take folks that were at a literacy level of 6th and 7th grade and get them to a licensed practical nurse within 3 to 4 years, right? Really accelerating learning. And I would say some of the important things here were these students were in cohorts. The support systems that they developed amongst themselves. When any one of them was struggling, all of them were there to help. They built support networks for care for children. We did provide, care for children there at the center for 3 and up who were, potty trained, right? And so, there was, you're never going to provide it all, but the support systems were helpful. Just wraparound supports. If somebody needed financial coaching or case management or access to more income supports, if someone needed health care, you need to address these kinds of issues. Transportation, we had a little fund for transportation, emergency needs. Part-time students have certain interruptions that if you can prevent them, right, at the right precise moment, you can sustain the activity there. And so it's not that you're providing everything to everyone. Part-time students don't need everything. They need something at that moment. And then the tutoring was really interesting because we were a community-based organization partnering with the community college. And the decision was that the community would do the tutoring because we were completely flexible. We can go to people's homes. We can do it at night. We were just completely flexible, whereas for a variety of reasons, the community college, we have an incredible amount of services at our tutoring centers and our wellness centers and in our veteran centers. We have many centers that support lots of students. We have 90,000 students, right? So we have to help a lot of people, right? So in some cases, it doesn't make us as good as helping specific people with specific needs at all hours. We have to get much better at doing that, but part of getting better is not doing it all on our own. And so what I plan to do at city colleges is leverage. There's a whole network, especially in metropolitan areas like Chicago. There's a whole network of community institutions and other partners that we can tap into that may be open at different hours, that may be working with special populations. And I think if we could do a better job of doing that, as well as a better job of working in our institutions to expand services and make them available. I love the idea of orientation,
Yes.
right? And deeper orientation. So I think we need to be flexible. And I think these big vessels like this, tend to be inflexible. It's almost like you got to have some speedboats out there in addition to the big vessel to be able to meet the needs of many other kinds of learners that you have, and especially part-time because it's, again, so diverse.
So Karen, you're working with hundreds of community colleges, so you're seeing a lot of the most creative work that's going on out there. Can you talk about some of the things that you see institutions doing that are
Sure. I'll build on Juan's kind of moving from the nonprofit to the connection with community colleges to some work Achieving the Dream's doing with community colleges attaching to community-based organizations. The idea being to create a holistic student support system for full-time and part-time adults, but we have something called the Working Student Success Network that we have 19 colleges in 4 states working to create a system of supports around financial coaching, transportation, access to public benefits, emergency kind of aid supports, and bundling those services at just the right time for adult students so that they can sustain momentum in enrollment, because we know that when students attend always part-time, so they're an always part-time student, that momentum across enrollment from the fall to the winter to the spring to the summer, and I'm including using all of the opportunities, are really important. So sustaining that is important. So the work we're doing with the Working Student Success Networks have great institutional reach. Now, there are state policy issues that also become structural barriers that we're working to address, and maybe we can get to some of those in a bit. The other thing that a number of Achieving the Dream colleges are doing through something that is our integrated advising system redesign work is they're looking at redesigning the way students enter into their colleges. And many are beginning to collapse what is an artificial barrier between credit and non-credit programs on campuses. We have a lot of adult students that are coming in part-time in non-credit workforce classes that we also need to be paying attention to and providing supports to. But in those redesign of the intake systems, understanding attendance patterns at the front end, understanding barriers. We have colleges that are doing non-cognitive surveys at the beginning of the intake process. Do you have transportation needs? Do you have childcare needs? Do you have financial aid needs? Trying to package all of that, and then at the front end, helping a student with an academic, educational, and career map. And then, if you look at a college catalog, and the third step I'll talk about is the guided pathways work that a number of colleges across the country are engaged in. We're doing guided pathways for full-time students primarily, but some of the most innovative colleges are looking at always part-time students. They're mapping out their pathways, always part-time, and instead of showing in their catalogs, here's the sequence, and it's really usually fall, spring, and it gives you an idea that you can complete the college and the associate degree in 2 years. They're mapping it out, and they're showing the adult students or part-time students at the very beginning, here's your map. This is how long it will take. And you mentioned it, the students said it earlier, knowing this on the front end is really important to planning, so that those holistic student supports and being much more intentional in designing systems and processes to support part-time students. We're seeing a lot of activity in those areas. And I'm really trying to focus on that hidden group, which is the exclusive part-time group. There's a lot out there now about 15 to finish and strategies to move part-time students to full-time to help them be successful. That, frankly, just won't work for a lot of our students. And I'm glad you're surfacing this to really say that, because we have to. Attending part-time is not a deficit. It's not a deficit. It's a reality for students. And we treat it as if it's a deficit when we only use attending part-time as the solution for reaching a credential.
Neil, part-time students are, generally speaking, paying more out of pocket for the cost of their education than full-time students because of a lot of aid policies at the state, especially at the state level. Can you explain a little bit why that is?
Sure. This is a significant challenge across the country, especially with the attainment goals that a lot of states have set out. They've done that without really kind of considering the infrastructure they have on the ground to support not only traditional age students, but older adults as well. And these are adults that have had some college or haven't attended a college before. Most states are really dependent on that adult population returning to institutions in order to reach their attainment goal. One of the challenges, or I keep saying one of the challenges, I think the main challenge in financing these students is that there's a perception that Pell covers the total cost of a part-time, low-income student, and that's not necessarily the case. It may help cover tuition, but it's definitely not helping covering fees and living expenses and those kinds of things. And that's where you really need state aid to come in and fill in that gap between what's left over in the student's budget after the federal aid's been applied. Students are very risk averse about loans. If you're in a situation where you just got laid off, the last thing you want to do is borrow to go to school, and so that's a real tipping point for students who enroll or stop out because they're scared to borrow more. At ECS, my colleagues, Drs. Brian Sponser and Sarah Pingle, worked on our financial aid redesign project, and there's 4 pillars to that. I'm going to go over this really quickly. And one is that aid programs should be student-centered. And with higher ed cuts going on across the states, many institutions think of state financial aid as like a second appropriation. And so we really need to turn attention that the aid needs to be focused on the students, not necessarily where they're going. It needs to be goal-driven and data-informed, which means that does your merit aid or need-based aid program have defined goals, and are you measuring those annually or semi-annually and reviewing those to make sure the aid program is actually doing what it was intended to do? Is the aid program timely and flexible? If you were laid off in October and all the aid was issued to institutions and students in September, then that's a real problem because there's no aid left for that student, or the part-time adult student that's coming back in the spring or later in the fall or the summer. The summer is a real big issue, and especially aid for certificate programs and that are kind of on a disrupted schedule that's not paired well with the semester form, the way we kind of set out these state-level programs. And finally, is it broadly inclusive of all students? And most of our major state aid programs are focused solely on traditional age students that are matriculating directly from high school into a 2- and 4-year institution. And most of those programs just solely serve 4-year institutions because that's where the bulk of those students go.
We have big issues, I think, with state aid programs and the way they're shaped, not just for part-time students, but for community college students in general, depending on which state you're looking at. But I think your study points out that a very few percentage of the dollars go to part-time students in those state aid programs, if they go at all to part-time students.
Right, yeah.
And the College Promise program and the College Promise work, which I think we probably should shed a light on, maybe is structured. It might be more structured for full-time students as well, less focused on thinking about adult students as part of the promise. I know Tennessee has has moved their promise into working for adult students, with the dollars being available for adult students. And we see a few of those beginning to look at adult students, but those also need to be designed with adult and part-time students in mind.
And
Right.
Tennessee has a lot of money.
Yes.
So they can do that, and a lot of states aren't positioned where they, so that money for a state that's not well funded, or where you are seeing cuts, they're going to have to make some decisions about where that money is actually going to come from. And that's a big political challenge, is eventually you're going to get to a point where you're going to have to take aid from another group of students so you can allocate it to this population.
They're strategic choices
Yes.
that,
Yes.
that are important.
Yeah, well, I think what that speaks to, the fact that there is a lot of energy right now oriented towards encouraging students to pick up their momentum, and some of that is recognizing that even the full-time 12 credit 2 semesters a year doesn't even get you to a sort of timely degree in 2 years for an associate's degree or 4 years for a bachelor's degree. So there's the 15 to finish campaign. There's these free college programs that require full-time attendance. There's a lot of power to that idea of momentum, so it seems like full-time would be the better option for some part-time students, but there are other part-time students that who we've talked about where that isn't the best thing for them. So want to talk about how you all think about helping students find the right balance of like what is going to keep their momentum going, but also allow them to be successful. And maybe Johari, you could speak to that.
Definitely, when the Community College of Baltimore County, we have a lot of acceleration programs, and we are known nationally for our acceleration through developmental education. As Missy talked about, if you come in, there was a time when you came in, there were 2 levels of reading, 2 levels of English, 3 levels of math, and if you're a student who, first of all, doesn't have any experience, has no family who can lead you through this process, that is very frustrating. And it takes a lot out of a student's enthusiasm about going to college. So over the last 7 years, we have definitely structured our developmental classes to be accelerated, to help students get to the college level classes faster. If they can see the light, then they will be more likely to stay. We have colleges all over the country who have actually taken our model and incorporated that because they see the benefit for students. And we have definitely tried to structure those for part-time students as well, so that they also get the benefit of that acceleration. Part-time students, being able to have classes at night that fit their schedules, being able to have classes on the weekends that fit their schedules is very important. I remember one time getting an email from a department chair saying, "This is not a joke." And, so like you open the email, they were starting a class that started at midnight because they were trying to help students who needed to have classes later in the day because of work schedules and things like that. And they did try to, to work that out to help students who were in those situations that may get off at 11 o'clock at night because of the type of job they have. So the community college is definitely a good place in order to have some of that flexibility. Universities don't always have that, but with community colleges having so many adjunct professors, there's a little bit more flexibility in trying to figure out what works for college students, even if they are part-time.
How do you help the students make their decisions about work? They're saying, well, I'm working full time, so I can only take this many classes. Is that, do you ever have conversations with them about like, well, maybe you could take more classes if you change something?
I definitely think that it's a very personal conversation. The academic advisors, as well as the academic coaches in my area, we work with students and we do talk about the full-time possibilities, but when you have some other, lots of students are coming and they don't have support systems. So if you don't have a support system, it's hard to have the conversation with a student about being full-time. In reality, yes, 15 credits would be great, but that's not always the reality for students. As you mentioned, I was a part-time student. I had a 2-year-old, I was trying to go to college, taking 18 credit hours. I mean, it was great that my family was there to help, keep her at night and weekends, but I also had a job, so I'm working 2 part-time jobs. I'm working, trying to get my classes done, and there's only but so much time in a day. And that was the worst semester of my life, trying to do all of the things. But you know, you have the conversations with students, but you have to be respectful of what they feel they can achieve and what they can do. And when you have no support system, it's a lot harder to have that conversation with the student than a student who does.
I agree. And I think there's an added element, which is that part-time student has to see the outcome of that education in terms of income generating
Yes,
possibilities.
definitely.
Because if they see the income generating possibilities, and it's just a, and believe me, you know, we know this from some of the literature and writings in the financial literacy world, that that our lower income residents are really, you know, thoughtful financially. They really have to make a lot with very few resources. They have to think about their finances all the time. Unlike many of us in this room, we don't think about a daily expenditure in the same way. And so because they're very thoughtful about this, they need to know that there really is an income producing opportunity. And if you know that, if you're a nursing program and you know that, boy, if I cut this down by 2 years, I can get out in the marketplace, I will have a job making $24 to $36 an hour, and this is where I'm at now, you might make the sacrifice. But if you might figure it out for a shorter period of time. But if you're not uncertain about that, if we're not tying, going back to guided pathways, the work that we're doing to the actual labor market, and we're not closely aligned to employers, and we're not providing actual job opportunities at the end of the road, then I think we've made it that much harder for our part-time students to make that critical decision.
We're not doing a good job on demonstrating to the students the return on investment and that has to be in those early conversations, so that those those cost-benefit kind of trade-offs decisions can be made. We also, I think, underestimate issues around the support systems that our students come to us with. Affordability is a major issue. You know, Sarah Goldrick-Robb and her research around food insecurity for students and homelessness. So you can see for many of our students, there's not that strong support system. And you know, inside our institution, there's a lot that we can do to structurally address some of those affordability barriers. And you know, one thing that Achieving the Dream's doing with 39 colleges is working on an open education resource effort where these colleges have committed to designing full degree programs using open education resources, which means there would not be textbook costs for the students. And one of the students in that initiative wrote a letter about just her basic decision about attending and the number of credits she can enroll in each semester. And she did an analysis of what her textbook costs would be as a full-time student. And she wrote that it would cost $1,890 some for her textbooks to attend full-time. So she added that, which was almost as much as her tuition. So she had to begin to make some choices. So she started to look at the schedule of classes, and she was looking for classes that were coded as OER, meaning that there were not textbook costs. So she changed her schedule to take a macroeconomics class with a textbook that was $210 on her spreadsheet that ended up being $0 with the OER. And she talked about how that would help her take more credits each semester. So our students are very financially savvy that way. They're running the numbers, and you know, those of us inside our institutions have to help our faculty become that financially savvy. You know, how much does it cost when you put required readings on the syllabus? I mean, small things that mean so much. That could mean that a student taking 3 credits can now take 6, or 6 to 9, and we know the more credits that a part-time student takes, the more likely they are to complete too. So that credit accumulation philosophy is really important.
And I would add, you know, from a policy perspective with part-time financial aid, that you just don't need aid to fill that gap with what's left to tuition. You need emergency dollars to help students out when they're in a situation. If you know, and this sounds silly, but it's an issue, especially at rural institutions. If a student's car breaks down, I mean, that's it. You know, they're going to stop out. And institutions need to be able to put their hands on dollars to help that student fix their car. And that's going to be the difference between having somebody complete a degree or, stop out and not return to school. So I think that, as you were talking about with the cohort that you had, the flexibility and that money that you're receiving from the state to do that kind of work is critical. And it's also critical, to kind of cross-train those financial aid staffs to where, they're more sensitive to those different needs. They're not just dispersing aid, on a semester basis, but they're actually kind of, moving into a kind of counseling area to help students deal with those issues and being a referrer to other parts of campus as well.
Financial aid to financial services offices, which is a different framework to work within.
At our college, we have success navigators who we can refer students to who may need that money to fix their car or need that money to buy just that one textbook. Like you said earlier, it's not about everything. It might be fixing one thing. So academic advisors, academic coaches, as well as financial aid refer students to their success navigators, and they help them also with other outside services they may need. If it's maybe using public assistance, they may not know that they qualify for some of those services, so they help students with those type of services as well, because the more support that those students can have, it'll help them be more successful in the colleges. So we all are trained to be more savvy when it comes to financial literacy and financial aid options for students as well.
Neil, we're talking about a lot of great ideas and important work that is expensive. And you've told us about how adult students are sort of not getting their share of aid. State dollars are scarce. How do we get the resources to do these things?
That's a great question. I think part of it is you have to start with education, and you've got to build a coalition of stakeholders that involve legislators, people from different state agencies such as Commerce, Higher Ed, K-12, folks from the workforce and business and industry community to gather them around and educate them about this issue before moving ahead with a policy. I think sometimes people get excited and they want to rush and try to develop a policy and push it out there. And you have, especially at the state level, most of your legislators went to four-year institutions. That's their experience. That's what they know. And a lot of their constituency that they communicate with are also four-year graduates or parents of four-year students that are very active in communicating what they think that needs are at a four-year level. You also have a very powerful lobby at the state level for four-year institutions, and two-year institutions don't have that strong of a lobby. And so that education is very critical before you move ahead with trying to structure policy or have a conversation around redesigning aid, just making them aware of the challenges that part-time students face and what can be done to help meet those needs.
I think that we don't have good data sets, so I'm going to make a statement that I think it's halfway data informed, but I don't believe that the hidden part-time student is just a community college sector issue. I think it's across the higher education sector. So I do think there are part-time students that are hidden in plain sight in our universities as well. So if we could figure out a cross-sector strategy, certainly, I think that would be top of mind for me as a higher education leader, and not just make it a community college issue. And also, it's a community-based issue. It's an issue in the city of Chicago, just like it's an issue in every one of the local communities of our ATD colleges. This is about economic and social mobility for a large group of citizens in our communities, not just hidden in plain sight in our colleges, but hidden in plain sight in their communities. And we need to figure out better ways to reach those residents.
Yeah.
I was just going to add, you're right in that, in order to reach the attainment goals, the community college sector is not going to be able to do it alone. You're going to have to need four-year capacity. And in order to do that, that's going to mean some real paradigm shifts in the way that four-year institutions function and how they deal with students.
I just want to throw in the role of philanthropy here and philanthropists, because I think that because of what you're pointing out, the critical role that community colleges play in upward mobility and strengthening local community and the promise of the American dream, whether you're in a rural community or you're in an urban community. The reality is that the flows, much of this kind of emergency funds and these, extra layers of support, can be enhanced, by the role of philanthropy. And you look at the kinds of investments that folks are making in four-year institutions rather than two-year institutions, and where that's going, right? Into sort of research and buildings and things of that nature, rather than sort of human beings to preserve the most precious thing we have in the United States, which is the opportunity for upward mobility, which our part-time students, by your data, are really not getting access to. So I think we need to make an issue of this so that we start to redirect the flows of philanthropy and philanthropists towards institutions like ours, to give us flexible resources. The challenge sometimes with the legislative approach, right, on some of these things that require flexibility is inevitably it becomes inflexible because it's a government type initiative. And so we need to figure out which pieces are, helpful for legislative investment and which pieces are more philanthropic related.
Great. This has been wonderful. I want to turn to questions from our audience in a minute, but before I do, just to quickly ask if there's anything else that you want to add about, what the people who are in this room and watching our live stream, we have policymakers and advocates and people from institutions. What can they do to, make sure we see more part-time students succeeding?
I would say start the conversation with students. Talk to the students, do focus groups, find out what their needs are, and try to figure out how your college can be more, to quote the title, student-ready college. Tia McNair and colleagues have just released this book, and there are lots of ways that colleges can be more prepared for those part-time students. And so I think part of that is starting a conversation with the students.
I'd say inside the institution for colleges to look at their data and disaggregate based on full-time and part-time student status, and then to further disaggregate based on the number of credits under those part-time buckets, and to begin to look at the enrollment patterns and to see when the leakage begins. And you can even take that into the course kind of pattern taking level and get a better sense of that, and then design against those gaps. With an intentionality toward improving the completion rates for those specific part-time students. And your study and other studies, the Community College Student Center for Student Engagement also did a study on if you go one semester full-time in your course-taking pattern as a part-time student, you're more likely to be successful. That we begin to look at those things more broadly as a collective, more research on it that will then, I think, help us drive out a more data-informed policy agenda.
I just building on that, I think it's interesting that on one hand we say we don't have the data sets to get us the information. On the other hand, we do. Our institutions have them, okay? What we have is a culture that won't share them. Higher ed is trying to protect its brand. Right? Because that's how you get students. So why would you share any data that's damaging if you're just trying to protect your brand? So I think part of what needs to happen is we need to, and I'm new to higher ed, but we need to change the culture. We need to be more transparent so that we can get to better outcomes.
And I would go back to the coalition building around stakeholders and beginning that education before you try to move on to a policy. Especially if you're going to move state dollars, and in many cases I think it's going to have to happen away from merit aid programs to help fund this population. Those are going to be really tough conversations. It's happening right now in Louisiana with the TOPS program, or they're considering redesigning that. I think when you see new money coming, it's going to take the form of programs that are targeted to in-demand areas and certificate programs and things like that. that are narrowly focused to, just a few programs in a small population. So we really want to see that more broadly inclusive of, more adults. And so it's really working to educate legislators and making them aware of the problem and where the money needs to go.
Wonderful. Great. So we have some time for some questions from our audience. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I have a cold. I came in late, and I'm sorry. I don't know if this was mentioned. My name is Mindy Reiser. I'm a sociologist. I've worked in everything from the Senior Fulbright Scholars Program to the Institute for Education Sciences and Education Labs. So I have a question and a comment. Start with the comment first. About the use of DVDs, CDs, opportunities to access information not being directly in a classroom. And the comment there is on NPR this morning, the Navy folks realized that giving young sailors 20 CDs and saying to them, go learn how to run a ship, didn't work. So they really needed hands-on direct engagement, as you were talking about the cohorts. So the first question is, what has the experience been of giving young people, or not so young people, the continuing students, the part-time students, access to these out-of-classroom resources? As I said, CDs, DVDs, looking at projects that can be videoed. And the other question is the liberal arts. How does that play into all of this? A lot of the students want work. They want good paying work. But what about encouraging them to take a history course, a literature course, another language course? Can some of you speak to whatever of these issues you'd like?
Yeah, and I would just expand that a little bit to sort of, the role of, any sort of, non-traditional, technology sort of distance, and how that factors in.
I'll start. I think many of our part-time students are taking a blend of courses on the campus and courses online. So they're using, the technology to learn. I think that our colleges are trying very hard to have strong professional development programs for faculty so that their online courses are well constructed. They are constructed in a way that builds engagement. We know from all kinds of data analytics we collect from online classes that when faculty are engaged in the platform and students are engaged, there's a higher level of achievement across the board with the students. So building that kind of engagement into the pedagogy is really important. I don't know a lot. I can't speak a lot to supplementary materials that aren't facilitated and built into tutoring and embedded supports. I can't speak to that because I think most of our colleges would be, instead of giving things and expecting that kind of self-direction, they'd be creating a mediated environment for it with supports.
I definitely agree with that. All colleges are looking to provide more online options for students, but we also know that looking at open resources is definitely a part of that, even with the students being on campus. So I don't know that there's a lot of data right now to show what those outcomes look like, but I think as more colleges go that direction, there will be. We know the students need other options of learning versus just having a textbook. So, you have open options as far as articles and journals and trying to get students to read things that are happening right now and understanding things that are, that they can relate to. Trying to have all of those things available to them, we're still working through it. I think all colleges are looking at how they can save money for the student, but also get them more engaged.
As far as the liberal arts and sciences go,
I was hoping that you were going to handle that.
I was an English major, so I'm in some cases I am a purist. I also know the reality. I know the student ROI reality, and we need to do a very good job on the front end with advising, especially for part-time adult students, to help them understand why in their pathway there's a history class, there's English, because all of that translates to this type of either bachelor's degree completion and then economic value and the type of career opportunities, or those types of experiences are embedded into a skill-based experience. So the liberal arts are still in the course, but they're embedded into a skill-based opportunity. So we know employers on the back end want students to have strength in all of the skills and competencies that come out of a liberal arts experience. But we almost have to flip things on their head to talk about it's not the liberal arts pathway that you're in, it's in a pathway that's leading to this particular career. That's just the pragmatic reality I think we're facing, especially with adult students, many of us coming for retraining that don't have necessarily the time.
And these aren't, obviously they're not in any way mutually exclusive, right? I mean, the reality is that the content that you would get is still embedded in the credentials, that people are getting. It's just that we need to provide options that deliver an ROI, sooner rather than later, right? Options that allow a student to, gain some credit, gain some skills, gain some certifications, gain some awards that are short of a degree, so that they can have a better life in the short run, and also the promise of further education in the medium to long run, right? So I think that the reality, if you're a part-time student, right, is you want to get to that first ROI point so that you can get to that second ROI point, right? And that's where these things come together. And because now we're smarter about this, we're stacking the credentials, we're allowing that credit that you've earned, and the learning that you've gained to build upon itself in the future, right? You now have the promise that students, will have, real incentives to continue on with that broader coursework, right, that is required.
I think we have time for one more question. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Maura Branley. I'm an independent consultant working on poverty alleviation. My question centers around the role of apprenticeships, whether or not you think there's value in that path and what could strengthen that, sort of alluding to the return on ROI and what that could add to the conversation.
I think it's phenomenal. I just say we at the community college, City College of Chicago, we've begun to do apprenticeships, and our apprentices are also part-time students, right? I mean, they're working in many of these apprenticeships, full-time, and studying, part-time, and it's working phenomenally. We have a partnership with Aon. Our students are making $38,000 a year. They're embedded inside of a company. They're studying part-time. And the only challenge with these is that we need to grow them, right? From my perspective, we've got an effort now, to increase 10, 20-fold what we're doing in the apprenticeship space. I think it's particularly well suited for the part-time student.
Emerging area, our community colleges especially need to gain more competency in designing apprenticeship programs and being more in the forefront with apprenticeship programs, looking at apprenticeship and the new apprenticeship opportunities in information technology areas, in health careers areas, as we begin to think differently about apprenticeship, the apprenticeship for the modern economy. I think that it is a wave of the future, and it will be very, very important for us to figure out how to structure it and deliver it, and work with many of the community organizations that are doing apprenticeship programs fairly well and have been for a number of years.
This is an area where I think you're going to see states find new money to aid these programs, because it hits all the high points for legislators, and that it's great for business and industry. It's helping the community. These students are coming through in cohorts, and you can see the success of them, and they're making money and spending money in the community. So I definitely think that you're going to see more money for this in the future.
And even in private sector. The Community College of Baltimore County, we are having partnerships all the time with organizations that are right in Baltimore who want our students to come and work with these organizations. So they're using the things that they're learning in class, but then taking them out and actually applying them. So I think you're right. They're gonna find money for it because the communities need it and they want it.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much, and thank you, Missy and Savannah. This has been an amazing conversation. Thank you to the audience. Thank you to people who are watching online. I, encourage any of you to, get in touch with, me or the panelists to continue this conversation. And, we hope to be doing more work on this topic, and we hope that many of you will be doing work on this topic too. So, thank you, everyone.